So just to back up a little bit, heat.gov is really where we're putting all the federal resources in one place and making them easier to find. And so just walking you through what I'll be able to go into in a little bit more detail, but I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions because I know you have a packed agenda. One of those things is news and events. So we have a newsletter called the Heat Beat, and it used to be just for our urban healing mapping campaigns, but now it's for a lot of the work that we do. So that's our general newsletter. A lot of that's going to come through in news and events as well. A learn page, which is not super robust at the moment, but eventually will be expanded to show more information on extreme heat. Urban heat islands, because that's a focus that we've had in the past, but it's not our only focus. Tools and information, really showcasing some of the federal tools that bring together a lot of different data sets from health and climate and other aspects. At-risk groups, which is kind of an explainer for various at-risk groups and what makes them vulnerable. And then planning and preparing, which has a really dense amount of content and a really good access to fact sheets and lots of other things that are out there. And then the about page, which is explaining what NIHHIS is. So I'm going to scroll down. This first kind of element here is just kind of some of the stuff that we want to highlight at any given time. It might change seasonally. But if we go down a little bit further, this is the part that gets people really interested. So one thing that's fairly new that I think people really appreciate is that I'm on my work computer instead of my Mac, so it's not showing perfectly here, but we have a 30-day running history of the number of people in the US that are under an active warning, watch, or advisory product. And so this is something a lot of people like to look at. It's actually getting kind of bad right now. So we've got 93 million people, about 28% of the population currently under some sort of product from the Weather Service. If you go down a little bit further, you can actually see that spatially. If I zoom out, it'll hide the heat layer, but you can see where those different products are. So this whole swath in the center of the US, the East Coast, a little bit over here in the West. And then we will be expanding the data available in this interactive map view over time, but right now it has maximum temperature for today. Let me hide this. It also has, the next tab has current temperatures coming from a variety of different stations, and you can click on them and get more information on those the temperatures. Climate outlooks coming from the Climate Prediction Center. And so if I expand this, right now it's showing you the days 6 through 10 temperature outlook. So you can see this area in the northern Great Plains has a 70% chance of above normal temperatures in that time period. But we also have a stack of other layers from the Climate Prediction Center. So days 8 to 14, the monthly outlook and the seasonal outlook. And then the last two tabs are climate projection. So they're both RCP 8.5, looking at 2050, and either looking at a percentile basis. So this is the 99th percentile here for the number of days that would be exceeding that percentile, the top 1% historically. And then the other tab is using 90 degrees Fahrenheit as a threshold. So we get requests for both of those things. And then we have the ability to feature tools or really anything in this panel. And so here we've got two of the tools that we wanted to make sure to feature. One is the heat and health tracker that NOAA and CDC developed together with some other agencies through the US Global Change Research Program. And then the Climate Explorer, which helps you get some climate projections. Let me go a little faster here. I'll skip the learn. It's just a little bit of background on extreme heat. It's got some content about wet bulb globe temperature here. Urban heat islands, the one thing I want to zoom into on this one, if you go to our mapping campaigns, which we've done across the country, this is all the locations we've done these urban heat island mapping campaigns as a citizen science project using mobile transects. And you can see in kind of the lavender color where we're doing them right now this summer. And for example, Montgomery County is going this Sunday, which is exciting. But I wanted to show you the heat equity tab here, which has data from these mapping campaigns. So it shows you the final map that was produced, and I can go into a slightly more complex one here. Houston, you can see the area that was mapped. You can get a bunch of stats on the left about the temperatures and how they varied across that surface. But on the right, what I'm excited about is that you can look at the temperatures that were observed in that mapping campaign in an environmental justice lens. So you can see which areas the White House and the new CGEST tool that they've developed consider disadvantaged, and which ones are not considered disadvantaged. and then you can look at comparatively what the temperature difference was between the advantage and disadvantage, or disadvantage and not disadvantaged, I should say, areas. What else do I want to highlight quickly? A number of tools. I could go into a bunch of these, but just really a place for us to put all of the various federal outlooks and tools. Eventually, we will probably expand to non-federal, but it just was an easy place to start to make sure we could get this going. At-risk groups, I'll just show you one of them. So children, as an example, there's a little bit of an explainer on what makes children more at risk. And then we'll enhance this over time, but some resources to learn about this particular population. Planning and preparing is the dense one I mentioned. There's a ton of content in this page broken down by the group of person that would be looking for it. So in this case, decision makers, which is not super specific, but it has information for the decision maker class coming from a lot of different federal agencies, some for public health officials, some for emergency responders, and a variety of others. And then further down is a section of tips, so you can get the, what do you do if you have to be outside during extreme heat? So we're trying to cover a number of different audiences, not only resilience officers, emergency managers, et cetera, but also the general public that will look at the site and want to know what they should be doing in extreme heat. I won't do much on the last page, just to show you that it's where we have more detail on what NIHHIS is and why we developed it and what some of the current projects are that we're doing through it. So maybe I'll pause there because I know you've got a packed agenda.
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat, and they pertain to the map where you showed the citizen science programs that are going on. This is Arizona, and we don't see Arizona on the map. And I believe that Dave Hondula tried to answer that, but perhaps you can also address why our region is not included.
We would love to do these campaigns all over the map. And so it's really just a function of where we've gotten applications from. And then we always get way more than we can possibly handle with our current budget situation. But we would love to see more applications from Arizona, for example. So the process opens. This gives me an opportunity to show you. Right now, it's the 2022 campaign application. But eventually this will be replaced with the 2023 campaign application, and that should open in the October timeframe. And so when that does, we definitely want to fill in some of these areas where we've had a little bit less representation in the mapping process.
Are there any other questions from the group? Actually, I can't see the group, and if so, just jump in. And if not, I have a question in the meantime, Hunter. One of the things that we talk about a lot in this group are the low temperatures or the overnight temperatures, because certainly we have a lot of people that are interested in public health, and the urban heat island effect particularly hits our vulnerable communities very hard. I see that you have maps here that talk about temperatures. Do you have a map specifically for low temperatures?
We don't have that in here now, but that would be a good thing to add. And since we have max temp, I have to imagine it wouldn't be too hard to get min temp in here as well. Yeah, we've got the max for days 1, 2, and 3. And I do hear that a lot, that minimum temperatures are also really important. So that would be a great thing for us to add.
Okay, and how do we sign up for the Heat Beat newsletter?
That one you can do at the bottom of any of the pages. There's a join mailing list link right here with a little form.
Okay. Somebody from the group will put that in the chat in a minute then. All right, are there any other questions for Hunter? Thank you so much, Hunter, for going through this preview for our group. I know that you've been very busy launching this website, and this is fabulous work. And maybe we can invite you back at a later date to go more in depth in some of these things.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me. Okay,
great. Okay, and next we have Paul Iniguez to talk about the weather.
Where everything is moving here. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Just go over the weather quick, not to use too much time for today because there's not a significant worry about any big heat impacts continuing in the next week or two. So just to review where we've been, we've actually had some days where the high temperature did not hit 100 degrees. That's not unusual for July, we usually have 3 to 5 such days each year that happens. And if we look at the forecast now for the next week, we do have a little bit of a warm up happening the next few days. You'll see that some moderate heat risk is going to be coming into the forecast, and I will touch on why that is important here. I did want to show just real quick some heat impact data research that we've been looking at the Weather Office in collaboration with some of our other partners. So this is coming syndromic data coming from the Essence data and the Maricopa County Health so far this heat season, and you can see that I put the percent of daily counts that were emergency room visits due to the heat for each day, and then color coded that based on our heat risk category. So what I really want to draw attention to is that yes, there are the big spikes when we do have those elevated temperatures, and they are correlating fairly well with where we do have the heat warnings. It says heat warnings when we put those up. But I certainly want to emphasize that there are impacts that happen on days where there are no heat warnings, those low and moderate days, the yellow and orange. So if you are someone that works with people that are more at risk to the heat, they just have greater exposure, they don't have the ability to mitigate their impacts, you probably shouldn't be waiting for us to be issuing heat warnings to be stepping up what's going on, because there's still a lot of those impacts that are happening on a lot of days. We see this in another data set as well that came from City of Phoenix, looking at the daily heat calls from the fire department. Very similar structure we see there. So there are these impacts that are happening on the low to moderate days. But like I showed in the forecast, we are going to have some of those coming up here. But then another bit of uptick in moisture and thunderstorm activity is possible later in the week. And then just looking at the outlook here for the week 2 period, it looks like that wet weather is likely to continue into the middle of August. And if we are expecting higher chances, increased probability for weather conditions, that is also going to correspond with likely depression in temperatures. So again, not any significant huge heat events anticipated at this time. That's all I got for the weather.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any questions? Paul, could you stop sharing your screen so I can see if there are questions? Okay, with that, thanks a lot, Paul. Keep the weather going, not in 110-degree range. This is good weather that you're working on. And Anne is going to introduce our next speaker.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Ann Richmond, ASU Sustainable Cities Network and Project Cities Program. So I'd like to introduce Jesse Westad. Sorry about that, Jesse. Principal of WERK Urban Design. So I have the good fortune to work with Jesse. He is co-chair for our Sustainable Cities Network Green Infrastructure Work Group. He's been a green infrastructure advocate for many years, and also he and his organization have done some work in the Lake Havasu area on their green stormwater infrastructure master plan. And so we thought it would be great to have Jesse share a bit of information on that effort, and also how the urban heat played into that project with the city. So Jesse, feel free to further introduce yourself and WERK Urban Design, and I will hand it over to you, and you should have co-host privileges as well if you want to share your screen.
Okay. Like Ann said, that I'm Jesse Westad, Principal WERK Urban Design, and we did the project for Lake Havasu City with Brian Schock from Helm, and that's for holistic engineering land management. And I had kind of short notice on this presentation, so it's going to be a little bit choppy, but we'll just try to keep it open, and then as we'll kind of go through this, and as questions come up, we can kind of pull from different things. So we'll kind of go past some of these. These are kind of like past projects that we've done, kind of building up to the Lake Havasu City thing. We don't have to spend time going through all these since we're on kind of a short time period here. But the kind of difference maker that was on this project was it was the first FEMA funded LED master plan in the country. And they're kind of looking at different things for hazard mitigation for the city limits, for how to build resiliency into the project. There's a major issues with sedimentation every time it rained in Havasu. And it was kind of open-ended when this project first came down the pipe on, we don't have specific deliverables that we want to give to you. So it's almost you as the consultant tell us what you think is kind of going to be the best measures. And two of the big people that were with Lake Havasu City was Brianna Morgan, who's no longer there anymore, unfortunately. She was their water conservation specialist, and Andrew Means, or he just goes by Drew, and he was with their maintenance staff. And before we kind of got this project going, I just spent pretty much an entire day out there, and they kind of showed me around the city and kind of things that they had done early on with, let's say watershed management group, or when Brianna was going to school out there. And then one of the big things that came from Drew on the maintenance side was just how much sedimentation, when it did rain, impacted their maintenance staff, where, almost they would take the whole staff would have to go all day, with the skid steer and shovels, scooping up the roads, taking all the sedimentation, all the soil that was on the roads, putting it in the back of a truck, and then moving it off site. And then it could be 2 days later, and all of a sudden they get hit with another storm, and then they're right back out there doing it again. And a lot of those issues is because there's not really much vegetation out there. Most of the yards, it's kind of on a hill, so it rains, the water and sedimentation go straight in the street, and then they go down road. So having to kind of work with that, we're trying to look at like, hey, how can we reduce these measures? So this was just kind of overview what LID define is. I'm preaching the choir here, so I don't have to spend too much time going over this with you guys. But what we want to do is look at, for example, in a typical neighborhood where you could have an attached sidewalk, a rolled curb, detached sidewalk, or no curb. How do we work with these different possibilities? And if you're an HOA or a neighborhood and it's already been built, how can we go back and look at these measures again? So what we did was kind of look at, okay, so if you've got detached sidewalk and we've got a landscape area in there, we could do curb openings, have a bioswale, or you can bump it up if you've got a attached sidewalk, put the chicane out there, have water rolling through. Or if you just have a road curb and nothing, then it's just a bioswale. Again, we got our curb cut, having water coming through. And then here we can see this a little bit better with the road curb conditions. So moving, all we're doing is just taking water off the street and then having it stay in these landscape areas. And that was the biggest thing that Drew was telling us. He's like, if we can just keep it off the street and have some of those pieces stay there and be able to soak into the landscape, that's going to help everything out. And then here we are with sidewalk condition. Again, just looking at like how that would look like through the different pieces. And a lot of these pieces were coming from, with the city of Tucson and with Brad Lancaster and what the work he was doing in Dunbar Spring, where you have an existing condition and like, how can you go back and do this, on the cheap and get it done? So the kind of like downtown area in Lake Havasu City is this whole McCulloch Boulevard. So what we want to do is map out the area and look at where, vehicular circulation is, pedestrian circulation. And if you've ever been to Havasu where you're not just there for like spring break or something like that, and you come up here to one of their events, they actually closed down this whole street from McCulloch. They've got tents out there. They're trying to create shade. And then even this large open space here, which the city is turning into this catalyst site because they want to kind of re-energize their downtown area. That was another RFP that was coming down the pipe. Using this catalyst site as, for new development coming in, here's kind of how we can set that standard. And then they also have the washes that go through town that are pretty bikeable. But again, there's not too much shade on them. So taking projects that we've already done, we look through McCulloch Boulevard, looking at different avenues, you know, if we're doing curb cuts or curb extensions, where those could be at, how to increase pedestrian safety at crosswalks while also introducing shade, and then kind of bringing shade into these wash areas. So as you can see here, these two intersections, this is what they currently look like. It's pretty rough looking. There's not too much shade at all. There's not a big, they've probably got more palm trees than anything, which again, don't provide too much shade. And then this is at that intersection of the catalyst site over in this picture here. Again, you've got this large open area that could be completely shade trees going all the way down, but there's nothing there. So, you know, how can we look at bringing in, not only dealing with stormwater, but then also providing shade through the use of vegetation? So we created renderings for the intersection here. We did curb extensions. Again, that reduces the amount of space that it takes to cross the street. It's going to help slow down traffic. And then we also use these for the stormwater as they go through, and just bring that in a little bit easier through the curb cuts. And then also providing, since there's this restaurant on that southeast corner, now they've got an outdoor patio space and you can bring people outside. So the other big piece too is you can't just sit there and put a tree in this little like 1 foot by 1 foot box. You got to look at, you know, how much soil does it take for a tree to become fully grown? And usually you need between 500 to 1,000 cubic feet of soil for that to happen. So if you have an existing condition and you don't have all that space, you know, how can we create? Oh, sorry. So how can we borrow that extra space in order to get that extra cubic feet of soil? So through the use of these silva cells underneath the street and permeable pavers, you can actually pick up the extra cubic feet of soil that you need for the root system to grow. So you'd have permeable pavers that's bringing water in, that's going down into the silva cell system, and now you've got root space for the trees to go in. And now you actually have a full grown tree that can provide shade all the way down the sidewalk. So again, going into the catalyst site, these were just kind of like opportunities and constraints map of what we saw through it with the trail network, the major streets. Again, just more opportunities for what can and can't be done, how to bring pedestrian circulation through here. So now so basically this is existing conditions, these are there, but then this would be if you're doing that curb extension at that major intersection of that currently where there's just, this park is currently with nothing going on. But now they want to bring in mixed use development. We've got a big shade screen. We've got parallel parking on the street. We've got bioswales along the street. It's 100% shaded. And we're collecting all the rainwater that's on the street. And if we go with an opportunity to collect gray water on the project, and you've got mixed use and you've got apartments, now we've got gray water from showers. We've got gray water from AC condensate. We've got gray water from the laundry system. So even though you've only got, you know, 4 inches of annual rainfall, when you start doing a mixed use project to bringing in multifamily, that's where you're really going to pick up on the amount of water that you have available. So again, just kind of some bigger looks at this and what that could be. And I'll just go back to one shot real quick that we kind of worked out, because we wanted to look at like on the residential side, how that would work as well. So let's say you've got a typical single family residential house, which a lot of Havasu is. So you're gonna be like, well, Jesse, there's not really that much rainfall coming on the roof that we can capture. So you're looking at, if you're only capturing 1,000 square foot off the roof at 4.36 inches of annual rainfall, that's only 2,594 gallons a year. AC condensate, if you have a 2-ton unit, I mean, honestly, you probably run a 3 or 4-ton unit. So this 571 gallons would bump up. Laundry machine, again, this is for 2 people living in a house. So you're averaging 3,931 gallons a year. And then for showers, that's 8,390 gallons per year for 2 people. So just from kind of coupling everything together, now you're looking at 15,487 gallons on average that you'd be able to pick up just on a single family house. And now you can kind of start pushing that out into the landscape. Instead of using rock, let's use wood chips and then actually have some vegetation going into there. So then you could get something more like this. But I know my time's coming up, so I'll kind of stop there and kind of open it up for questions, and we can bounce around from there.
Thanks, Jesse. Could you tell us what the perspective was of the city relative to urban heat and how this kind of tied into their interest for such a green infrastructure master plan?
I would say at first it was more about the stormwater issues that they were having. And I think it's maybe just because if you live in Havasu, like everybody understands the heat and it's hot, and maybe you're not thinking that there's anything you can do about it. But Brianna was the one that really started pushing with, but bringing in green infrastructure, that's where we can really start like making a difference on just basically the temperatures alone. And they've got this project closer to the water downtown. It's called the Rotary Park, where it's all just wood chip mulch. And if you go down there, it almost feels like 15, 20 degrees cooler, like when you go into this little park. And you have road runners running around. There's a bunch of wildlife. And I feel a lot of people that when we were talking to the city almost didn't even realize that existed or thought it was a totally different thing. Because when we brought up wood chips, a lot of people are just like, well, you can't do wood chips here. We're like, well, you actually can, because in your own town, you have the Rotary Park that's all wood chip mulch. And that's probably the most lush space that you guys have. So then it's almost like a light bulb kind of turning on, like, oh yeah, I guess we could do that.
Mm-hmm. And did you say like Havasu only gets 4 inches of rain annually?
Yeah, so it's almost half of what we get here in the valley, which was it was kind of eye opener on what kind of difference that makes. Where let's say in Tucson, where let's say they're getting 10 to 12, and they're able to just do curb cuts and kind of let vegetation last on their own. And then us, it's a little bit tougher to get them going, but once they do, they kind of work out. And then Havasu, okay, there's not too much that are going to be kind of surviving on their own. And that's where it kind of looks at how can we bring in other vegetation or use gray water as a major resource, especially if you have this downtown area with mixed use where we can pull a ton of gray water and actually make this really lush environment.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Jesse? Melissa, did you have any? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, but Jesse, if you can stop sharing your screen so we can see the other participants.
Okay.
Thank you, Jesse.
So Jesse, the rainwater per household, that was per year, that was an annual, or was that monthly? What was that time frame, the 15,000 gallons?
Yeah, that was annual.
Okay, so does 15,000 gallons support by itself that kind of green infrastructure that you were talking about around a house?
Yeah, correct.
Cool.
It looks like Paul has a question in the chat too. How well do systems like this handle rainfall variability?
I mean, I think that's the point of gray water, where you're trying to provide some resiliency into all of these systems. So, if you are just doing a curb cut without any gray water and you're totally relying on rainfall, then you're going to almost have some kind of supplemental irrigation. And then it's like, okay, so are we using potable water to provide this irrigation? Which is definitely an option. But if you can bring in gray water and you have somebody taking a shower every single day, or you have a large amount of people taking showers and you only need a percentage of that water. Now that's like bringing that throughout the entire year. There is no like steep incline or decline, or same thing with the laundry system, or trying to make things stretch out with cisterns. But because with 4 inches of annual rainfall, or 2 to 7, you can't get a big enough cistern to make it through the really hot months of May and June. So how do you supplement that through those hard times?
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Jesse, if you could put your contact information in the chat, that would be great. I know that you did it in the beginning of the meeting, but if you can do it again, that would be really terrific.
Okay.
And I do plan on having Jesse and Brian come to speak to our green infrastructure work group in more detail so he can do a longer presentation on this particular topic. So Jesse, thanks for joining us today.
And thanks for doing this on short notice too.